going to call this meeting of the Governance Committee to order. We'll start with a roll call. Assistant Mayor Kelly.
Here on Zoom.
Councilor Tabor.
Present.
Councilor Lombardi.
Here.
And I'm Councilor Cook, and I'm present, and we're joined by our legal counsel. So we're going to start on the agenda today with training for city volunteers. This is something we've been working on for a while. We'll start with an update first on where we are, and then I will share on the screen a draft code of conduct policy, and we can work through that then at that stage. So I'll turn it over to our city attorney.
Thank you. So as far as the training manual, I don't really have anything to report. I thought the next stage would be really to work on the policies that need to be inserted. And once we've agreed on those policies, I might work on the language of the training manual a little bit more. And until we get to a final product, we can't put anything into Power DMS or so I think everything will flow once we've addressed all of the policies that we want inserted into the manual, and we make sure that they're in good shape. So I did work on the code of conduct for city councilors and city volunteers, which I really took from the standards of conduct and code of ethics for employees. And it probably has a lot of language in there that's really not necessary for city councilors and volunteers. I tried to take out and thin it down quite a bit as I went through, but kind of followed the highlights of what's in the current code of conduct for employees. It seems like we should have sort of the same standards that apply. So I'd be interested in any comments and, wordsmithing, or if you think that some of this is sort of unnecessary. I wondered about if I should have theft or destruction of property or drug-free in here, but I guess it can't hurt to have it in there for people, to be thoughtful about it. But I also wasn't sure. The other point would be whether you want to have any consequences in, because obviously under this, for the employees,
Excuse me.
there's always the notice that violation of the policy could result in discipline or dismissal. I don't know how heavy-handed you want to be, if you want to say that in the policy or let it go sort of unsaid, but basically understood. If you're in violation of the policies, then it could lead to some action. But I would think, like everything else, in the first instance, it would be corrective action and education and counseling kind of approach. So those are things that came to my mind as I was writing it. I kept the language in following what we already have for employees, but you may want to soften it a bit. That's up to you, how you want the policy to read.
We have two policies that we're talking about, right? The non-discrimination and
We're gonna talk just about the code of conduct for city
Okay.
councilors and city volunteers.
Okay.
I'm sharing it on the screen because we just got it
Oh, yeah, okay,
to look
that
at,
one.
and
Yeah, all
so
right, yeah.
I think that's the real question I think here, and I think the city attorney laid this out well, is how far do you go in a code of conduct for volunteers and elected officials who are not employees, technically. And we all know from our discussion last year, the limits in discussing conflict of interest, the limits that we have with regard to things like removal. You know, we have very strict limits there, and you have to actually commit conflict of interest violation under the Code of Ethics and commit a violation under the Code of Ethics to reach that standard. But so this is really meant as guidance
Yeah.
for behavior, and noting that, you know, maybe if you have multiple violations here of code of conduct, that maybe then you get referred for a question of whether or not, you know, if it's habitual, I mean, I guess would be the question. If you've had habitual violations, is it then something that gets referred to the ethics board for determination if that's actually, you know, crossed a line? I don't know. Yeah.
I received a snail mail letter without any identification of the person, but it indicated that they were on a city board and that they were talking about how they feel like they are by I didn't think to bring it with me. I was just stunned by this lack of transparency of who this was. But basically saying that they feel like they don't have the rights of a private citizen being on a city board.
Well, I'm sure I know who that is, but we can leave it anonymous. And I think, you know, one issue that a lot of the
thought of who that is.
Yeah. One issue is that once you are doing the city's business, that you're part of a public body, your committee is part of a public body, and your work for that committee is a matter of public record.
Am I
Unfortunately,
the only one that got that letter?
no. I got that letter. So the problem is that it can also make you a target of people who are involved in litigation or have complaints against the city, whether it's justified or not. And there's nothing we can do legally to stop that other than to try to ensure that it's not being misconstrued or whatever requests for discovery or depositions or documents isn't too broad, that it's, you know, reasonably related to whatever the matter in controversy is, and whether that individual is being targeted because they're a member of the board or just for some random reason. Generally, any member of a board or a committee is susceptible to having their documents in regards to that committee and public comments in regards to the work of that committee subject to some scrutiny. Does that limit their right to free speech or their rights as citizens? It doesn't, but I think it can be intimidating. And we've seen in a right to know world that there are very aggressive requests for electronic communications with anybody who sits on a public body. But of course, for our volunteer boards, they don't have city email. They don't have separate city cell phones. The positive, the other side of that is, for our public boards and committees, generally their work is done in public. It's on the record, it's recorded, subject to minutes, and the materials in regards to their work, they're all public record. But now, occasionally, people are suspecting that there's communication that's not being done in the public domain, and they're seeking to invade their personal electronic devices to try to determine that. And to the extent that we can, we work against that, assuming it's strictly city business that they're talking about. If it's some other matter that's not strictly city business that's at issue, then this is a discussion for the legal department that we're ongoing with, I'm having with staff, and that is, to what extent does the city legal department represent individuals who may be targeted as a result of the fact that they're on a public board, but the issue has nothing to do with the work of that board. So,
Yeah.
to the extent that the issue has to do with the work of the board, I think that we're clearly within our guidelines to represent them as a member of the board and the board as a whole and the committee as a whole. But when it then trickles into other matters, it's a little murkier, and we've been discussing where that line is. So I do think that, as part of the training and the training manual, we talk a lot about the right to know law. Like, now you are part of a public body, and what does that mean? Well, it means you need to do all your business in public. You shouldn't be texting during the meetings to your fellow board members. Your conversations need to be in public. You need to understand that whatever documents that you have in regards to the city's business are public records. There's that education. And some people can take it as being, now you've limited my right to comment and make comments on particular issues, where it's not limiting that, it's just you're potentially spotlighted, and then it could lead to somebody invading your privacy in order to determine if there's something going on untoward that's not following the rules of the public body. It's complicated.
Yes,
A little complicated.
Go ahead.
Yeah, but I think the purpose of this is to educate everyone so they don't fall into any of those traps. And in terms of penalties, if somebody's a repeated violator of the policies, where does that lead? I suppose it leads to the ethics committee. And we've got a pretty strong process around that, I think. And, the ethics, it ultimately comes to the council, and the council has to weigh, this is somebody that was put into office by the voters, but we see a recommendation from the ethics committee, and we have to act on that. And I think our ethics committee language says that there are 4 options. Put something on file, vote to censure, vote to remove, and I think there's a fine option too.
Yes, there is. There's a fine and referral to criminal court.
Referral to the Attorney General, yeah. So, assuming that that's a correct assumption, that if there's repeated violations, it goes to the Ethics Committee. I think we've done a lot of work on the Ethics Committee language, and it's pretty good. Does policy violation fall into violation of the ethics ordinance? That would be the question.
I think that's the good distinction, the question, that we know what, under the Code of Ethics, we've defined very clearly what are clear ethics violations. The goal here in the policy is to educate individuals on expected behavior that maybe doesn't fall under the Code of Ethics. So it doesn't reach that threshold. And the only instance when I can think that it does is when you have repeated warnings and continued violations here. But I also have another question here on, we have different standards depending upon where you serve. So if you're an elected official, you have a little bit more stringent standards. And if you're a member of a land use board as well. But if you're a member of a committee, they're a board or commission that is not a land use board and is not the council, you're not governed by state law. And so therefore, you can be removed for violations of policy without going through the conflict of interest ethics process, because that is at the will of you serve at the will of the mayor and the council. And we don't have that necessarily clearly laid out anywhere. But I would assume that any of these violations, you would first be warned by your chair that you've committed a violation, please don't do that again. And then if your chair had to warn you more than twice, there would probably be a conversation with the mayor. You know, do you want to keep committing these violations, or do I need to bring this to the attention of the council and request potential removal? I would think that would be the process, but that isn't necessarily laid out here. Do we want to lay that out? That what violations of this policy could potentially be if you are not subject to state law, if your position is not subject to state law. Because once you get into state law, there are very clear guidelines.
Yeah.
Because I don't think anyone would want anyone on their committee that was constantly ignoring a drug-free policy necessarily, or harassing other members of their committee, ignoring a harassment policy, right? I think that there would be really serious concerns, right? Now, under absenteeism and tardiness, we do have some provisions in some of our ordinance that, provide some guidance on absenteeism and tardiness, but I think it's not unreasonable that someone is removed, say that they don't show up for 6 months in a meeting, right? And some of our ordinances say if you miss more than 2 meetings that you can be subject to removal, but not all of them. So
this originally was 3 unexcused absences.
Yes.
That's the employee, that reaches definition of abandonment of the job.
Right. Right. So do we want to be, so that's really my question. Do we want to be clearer here, or, and do we want to lay out consequences, or do we want to just say, leave it a little less strict and just provide general guidance?
My sense on that question is to be more lenient.
Okay.
It's a heavy hand to outline that in writing, and, you know, I mean, let's hope we're all adults in the room. You know?
Yeah, and the purpose of this is to educate. This is training. You know, if we take the Socratic approach that no one does wrong knowingly, we just need to know what's wrong. But, you know, I'm maybe not as lenient as you are. There needs to be, I think what we've said a failure to meet these standards is cause for concern, discipline, and possible removal. Well, I think if we had violations of drug use or violations of harassment, we would be there, wouldn't we? You know?
But
Or if we had theft.
yeah, I think there are some things that are more offensive, if you will, than others. But I guess that's what I'm saying is that's really a subjective thing. I mean, if there's sexual harassment, that's critical. If there's drug use, that's critical. And I think we know that without saying which one is which. If someone has multiple absence from a blue ribbon committee, it's, you know, that's worth having a conversation, but it's not necessarily saying, you know, it's,
Right.
you know, I forgot. I mean, I forgot there was a committee meeting. I have forgotten this committee meeting at least one time.
It happens. It is.
Yeah, so, I don't know. I guess I prefer a more subjective approach than, you know, kind of a dictative one.
But what you don't want to have is a situation arise where there's clear misconduct or malfeasance and you don't have consequences written down. That seems to me. Or that you don't have any enforcement process. I can think of a case in the, you know, the Goodwin case where the rules, the policies weren't as strict as they could have been. And here comes the situation right at you.
Right.
And or have you got the ability to take action? And it was, you know, we're dealing with everything in the public eye, and the public expects us to keep our house in order.
So do you think it would be reasonable then to just add a line under in objective and purpose? We have this, the last sentence says failure to meet these standards is cause for concern, discipline, and possible removal. Should we add a line about the process there? This will be determined by the chair of the committee in conjunction with the mayor. Council?
City council?
Yeah.
That's one way to go. I mean, that deserves a lot of thought,
Yeah.
seems to me.
Well, as you're all talking, it occurs to me that the more egregious violations maybe could be met with their own policies. So you don't have to put it all in this policy. This is more of a general guidance, whereas, you know, I mean, theft or destruction of property is going to be a crime anyway. So, not so necessary, workplace violence, that would be a crime anyway. And the discrimination and harassment policy, it stands on its own. I'm not sure what you might want to do about drug-free, or if you even, hopefully, don't even really need to
Well,
mention
this is
it.
designated a drug-free zone
Right,
Right.
already, and so
right. So I don't know if you want to just say that, as opposed to the idea of bringing anything or arriving under the influence, just that the city property or city facilities are drug-free zones. So you could keep this on a lighter note where you're talking about courtesy, honesty, safety, and absenteeism. The confidentiality and non-disclosure, I mean, that is, I think, John, you pointed out that would be, part of the education about non-publics. Most of the boards and committees don't have those to be concerned about in terms of their
Right.
duties. So maybe you don't need it in this maybe this policy has too much in it, is what I'm thinking, and you might want to soften it and leave these other issues for separate policies or governance under whatever existing law would be invoked depending upon the conduct.
I like the fact that it lists out all the different policies, even if it says see separate this other policy, because it gives people a place to see that they all exist. I think there's value in that, because otherwise people are like, oh wait, there's a policy I didn't know about. So having all the references here, I think, is helpful. Even if we have a secondary policy, which you see under F, the non-discrimination and anti-harassment, we will have a separate policy on that. I like having the referral there, just so that people are aware it exists, and then we know that they've read it and they've seen it referenced more than once. I don't think we need a policy on theft or destruction of property. It's easy just to say. You can't.
yeah, it's
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know that we need a workplace violence policy necessarily for volunteers. They should just know that that's not okay. Like, violence is not okay. And on safety, I don't know that under drug-free, it might be reasonable to add a line at the beginning saying this is a drug-free. The city is a drug-free, or the city hall is a drug-free facility. And then say bringing, possessing, or using, I kind of like the format. I kind of like that they're all there, is what I'm saying.
yeah, oh yeah,
essentially.
I like that it's all there, yeah, but I guess we're talking about consequences and defining consequences, and if you try to define consequences that meet all of these policies, then that's a little, I mean, for example, the absentee thing. If someone's absent from a committee multiple times, they're not interested, basically. They're not contributing. And that's just a discussion for them. So, we see you're not interested, you don't want to be here, you know, you're welcome to resign if this is not your thing, and that's okay. We'd rather have somebody that's more committed.
Right, right.
We're not making like a, you know,
Right.
they'll be terminated from the committee, you know, I mean,
Right.
it's
It's just not a fit.
Right. Right. Yeah, there are definite, I think there are definite differences in the way that you consider some of these, I guess, modes of discipline, expressing concern, expressing, and I do think that it's important to leave that to the chair of the committee and to then the mayor next, before it's brought to the attention publicly to a council meeting.
yeah.
Only because you don't know the situation that someone
Yeah.
may be in or may not be in.
Family
And
situation, then, yeah.
exactly. One may be missing meetings because they have a family member that was just diagnosed with cancer.
Yeah,
And you want to be mindful of that.
yeah.
And
Or they lost their daycare, you know,
that's right.
that's a big one.
It's a big one. And so you need to, need to have some flexibility there. I can also see a case, as much as I think that it'll be really important to have that non-discrimination and anti-harassment policy, where there's a perception of language that somebody considered offensive or inappropriate, that I can see a case where there's a warning issued by the chair, a conversation and a warning, and I can see instances where the language is just so egregious, we really don't want you to come back. So there are degrees of everything. And so I think it is important that we leave that to the discretion of the chair and then the mayor. And noting that, we know what is, from our discussions from the Code of Ethics, what is removal, like what is something that you can remove someone under who's actually elected or sitting on a land use board versus sitting on a committee. Our committee members in some cases are just, they're in a much different position,
Right.
They're
They're appointed for what they can bring to that committee's work. And, we expect them to do their homework and be a engaged voting member, but they're not making multi-million-dollar land use decisions. They're not, picking the next police chief
That's right.
or the next school superintendent. So, here's a question. Is it start with the chair and then go right to the mayor? Or let's take police commission, fire commission, school board? Do they, as a body, take up the issue? They might want to do that.
It's tough on a three-person commission.
It's tough on a three-person commission, but,
The advantage of of police and fire commission is they don't really have separate committees that are dealing with
Yeah,
separate things. So when we talk about committees, we're really only talking about council committees or school board committees. Since they don't really have those structures, then they probably aren't going to deal with it, I would think. But the school board would, and so would the council, with committees that are serving. And frankly, I'm not very familiar with the school board's process on how they establish committees, who they appoint, how they appoint them, how they ask them to serve. I'm not really clear, because it is not the same as the council process. So, and I suspect they have their own rules with regard to that, but they should be subject to these rules as well.
So I know that the school board just recently revised and updated their rules. They did not have very fleshed out rules. I don't know about the police commission or the fire commission per se, what they have for operating rules of procedure or policies. I can look into that.
They are all subject, though, to the charter, definitely.
Right.
And are they subject to these council policies, is my question, I guess.
Yes, I don't see any reason why they wouldn't be. I mean, they're charter departments, so, and they are committees, they are elected officials, the commissioners anyway, to sit on the oversight boards for those charter departments, but they are elected officials, so I guess this really should be maybe captioned for elected officials and city volunteers, as opposed to just city councilors. Well,
Yes.
now that you made that point, clarified that. So as you've been talking, I've gone through a number of these things. Maybe what I can do is just, we're making them aware that we have a non-discrimination and anti-harassment policy, and that it would apply to them, but really that policy is actually based upon state law, right, and federal law. So the consequences are set forth in the state law, right? So you wouldn't need consequences in this policy for that. Same would be for theft, state law. Workplace violence, state law, right? So I'm seeing, a way to maybe word these. Maybe you want to keep something highlighted just to make people aware that, we have a certain policy, but, it's really governed by state law or federal law or ordinance, for, city property should be a drug-free, alcohol-free zone, right? Without saying what the consequences are, and then they can look at the other related policies, or they can, if interested, go to whatever federal or state law underlies those policies.
I'm
that
just
make
looking
sense?
through this list, and there's few things that are not governed by state statute or federal law. Just a few things, and I might have missed them, but courtesy, respect, professional conduct, honesty,
Safety.
although, I don't know, OSHA,
OSHA covers a lot.
OSHA covers a lot. Copier use, telephone copier use. I don't know, so maybe those are like a separate category that, from theft, violence, conflict of interest, confidentiality, non-discrimination. That's, so would it be helpful to have those categories separate?
Broken out, yeah.
It's a question, I don't know.
Yeah, I could try to reorganize this in a way that breaks them out into, generally the policy is, to be honest, to show up and be respectful, right? However, please see other overriding governing policies that are based upon state law, federal law, ordinance. And those would then refer them to, drug-free, non-discrimination, safety, theft, violence, conflict of interest.
Right.
And then you wouldn't have to say consequences.
No. You could, though, in that last line of that first paragraph, failure to meet these standards is cause for concern, discipline, and possible removal, comma, and penalties according to state or federal law. So you could make it clear that there are potential penalties.
So I think I'm hearing that you'd like to break the two categories. Here are policies for just general standards of conduct
Yeah.
that we hope you all, aspire to. And then here are overarching city policies you should be aware of that are based upon other legal requirements. Something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think that makes sense. Does it make sense to everyone? And these are things that everybody should know anyway.
Yeah, of
generally.
course.
So
But
it's not,
sometimes they don't.
no, sometimes they're not aware. That's right. Sometimes it's important. You never think about this, but, people who are self-employed sometimes never encounter these things in their workplace. So it's important for them to know.
Yeah. And if it's just referred to and it says see policy, other policy, and then we can embed the link into the training manual, then it's up to them if they want to at least, hey, okay, anti-discrimination, there's a policy there, I'm not going to really read it, or, oh, I'd like to read it, and I can just hit click easy enough to go ahead and find it and read it. Or same with the conflict of interest.
Right. Oh, well, and I think we want them to read these things, so we might want to, when we put this in Power DMS, make sure that they have
Actually
clicked
read them.
through and read them and acknowledged that they read these policies.
So I was part of a committee, I won't go into details, that doesn't exist anymore. And but I was really horrified at what I saw, the way the business was conducted, and that the chair was a dictator. And did not allow some people to speak, and did not allow some people, when the vote for the chair came up at the beginning of the year, it was railroaded, and a person who wanted to be considered wasn't allowed to be considered.
Wow.
Fortunately, that committee doesn't exist anymore. But, just
I think
so,
we should address that, what it means to be the chair, what their responsibilities are, or that is part of the manual, I think.
Yeah, we did have
discussed
that.
yeah.
It is part of the manual. Do we need to have it here, I guess is the question?
Well, that is
Do we need to
that
include-
is the question, and that was, I was just stunned at that committee, and it was a committee that had been loosely controlled by the city. And doesn't exist anymore.
Well, I know of some instances where we have some challenges, even currently, with how things are managed. And it might be reasonable to have some guidance for the chair here as well on how, and we don't have any guidance anywhere on how we elect chairs for committees. So it might be worthwhile to have a little bit of guidance there. Because I don't think that it's conducted the same way in all of our committees, is what I would say. And I can see how some individuals could feel like the process currently isn't fair in some places. So it might not be unreasonable to have not just guidance, but have some kind of policy, some kind of statement in policy, like a little paragraph for the chair.
Yeah, or
Elections
you're talking about having a sort of a governing rules for your standing committees, which is basically, Robert's rules. But, we have sort of informal process, that we all accept as being appropriate for how to vote for the chair and how the chair should be conducting themselves. So I was just going to go back through the training manual to see what we said exactly here.
Yeah. I mean, I think that we provide general guidance in the training manual, but it's not binding in any way.
Role of chair.
It's guidance. It's not binding. Do we need to put that somewhere? Maybe it's not in this policy. Maybe it's somewhere else. Maybe it's in ordinance instead.
In terms of duties of a chair, Roberts is pretty comprehensive.
Yeah, I was going to say,
I'd say not every committee follows Robert's Rules of Order either. So I think like the city council doesn't. The city council has our own rules of order that deviate from Robert's in a few places.
Unfortunately, Robert's Rules of Order are so expansive at this point that
they're very rigid.
they are
So that's a safety net.
very complex, and it's preferable to have something succinct and simplified. But we have a role of the chair, but I don't think we actually talk about how a chair is appointed or voted on. And I don't know if any of these committees, the mayor identifies the chair. It's always the committee that votes.
I think it's the committee that does.
Committee vote, yeah. And I don't know how that's done for our elected bodies outside. I mean, the council has clear rules in the charter for how we elect the chair. We don't.
Yeah.
The citizenry elects the chair or the mayor. But I don't think that the school board, the police commission, and the fire commission have clear guidance anywhere at least in ordinance or in the charter on how the chairs. So
they're not the most votes?
No, they are not. And it might be challenging, especially with like the school board. Well, with all of them actually, when you think about it, because they don't come up for election at the same time. So you could have
That's true.
the most votes in one election, but then in the next election you have the most votes again. And so I believe they all vote for their chair, but I don't know what their rules are around that
Right.
or what rules they followed. I mean, they might not have
Well,
rules around that. I'm not sure.
I think the rules are, I don't want to be it.
That's right. Whoever doesn't have their hand up.
Maybe it's something that should be in the manual here.
I think we've had, I forget which committee it was. Maybe it was audit committee. We had a staff person be a temporary chair to have nominations come from the floor. And then
That's what we did with the Arts and Cultural Commission as well. Is Sean Clancy served as kind of the interim until we had nominations
Right,
from the floor. Yeah.
right.
And now, traffic safety, is the city councilor designated as the chair?
No, they're elected. They elect a chair, is my understanding as well.
So, yeah, so,
But I think they have a tradition of the city councilor being the chair.
yeah. That's because no one else wants to.
So, it really does depend on each. We aren't really clear. The only thing that we're clear about in the ordinance, which is something we changed, is we put in a requirement that you elect a chair in January of
Right.
each year.
Yeah,
But that only applies to commissions, boards, and committees, and blue ribbon committees. It doesn't apply to all elected bodies, because we don't do it the same way. In fact, I don't think that they have, I think that they choose a chair for each of those after each election, not
Right,
every year.
yeah,
Yeah,
I think that's right.
yeah. So, so they don't follow the rules in our ordinance. Our ordinance, though, doesn't cover them, whereas
Well,
this should cover them too.
Don't they have an election every year, though?
They don't.
If the city.
Every 2 years.
And I meant 2 years.
Yeah, every 2 years, yeah.
Yeah.
So it's every 2 years, not every year in January. And so that would be slightly different, a slight difference.
Well, that's elected in, and then it would
Yeah.
follow the council, where with 2-year term
Mm-hmm.
for that. So I think that's okay.
So I'm just looking at page 8 of the manual. It has at the top role of chair, so maybe in there should be something in the manual, and the manual itself and all of these policies, we need to look at how they apply to the police commission, the school board, fire commission, as you've brought up today. But we should add a paragraph about how they should go about deciding who the chair is, depending upon what the committee makeup is and what the ordinance say, and have the ordinance reference in here. I'm not sure if this is so much a policy as it is, a practice, that they should be trained on.
Is that in the handbook?
This, what I'm referring to is our new handbook, yep. And it's top of page 8, role of the chair. It only talks about conduct of the meeting and managing the meeting. It doesn't talk about how you determine who's the chair.
I think it is important, as we've identified here, to have the staff liaison to whatever committee serve
Until there's a
that
chair.
capacity for that election process, so that you're not creating bias in an election process with a chair. It sounds like that's what we kind of informally do already, but I'm not sure that that's the case across the board. I think that's it's about being fair.
It's something that we should set out in the manual, I think.
Yes.
I don't know that you'd need a policy about it. Maybe it's just guidance in the
Guidance,
manual
yeah.
as to how to proceed.
Right. And anybody then who's sitting there who's read the manual, which they will have done in order to be sitting on the committee, can always raise their hand and say, hey, the manual says this is the process we're supposed to follow.
Right. Right. And that's the goal, right?
Yeah.
Is that they have some place to look and
yeah.
have their questions answered.
Aside from coming to you.
Aside from visiting the legal department.
Right. The goal is to provide as much information as possible so that people aren't confused
Yeah.
about processes, so there are fewer questions
Yeah,
being asked.
that'd be a good thing. And I just want to say, just point out on the code of ethics, it is limited to conflicts of interest, right?
Yeah, that's what I was,
And then,
back of my head.
and
is-
then they added financial disclosures. So there is not a broad code of ethics that deals with general conduct. And I think you said you've discussed that, and it's based upon certain limitations.
Right. Well, and that's what, when we had those discussions 2 years ago as a body, it was really clear to us that because the RSAs are so limited, you can only have certain requirements in your code of ethics.
Yep.
But the only bodies that are subject to the code of ethics as the form of removal are the elected bodies and the land use boards. Everyone else could be removed for any reason at any time without committing a code of ethics violation. So, and all those individuals, it gets a little bit tricky because there are legal cases where a land use board member has committed a criminal violation, but because it wasn't in the conduct of their business on the land use board, they couldn't be removed, even though they
It
committed.
wasn't during their
Yes,
duty, right?
exactly. Now, if you were just serving on a committee, you could be technically removed. But if you were serving on a land use board or you're an elected official,
Right.
it's not feasible unless it was during your duty. Now, there's a good argument for if it's theft, though, from the facility where you are practicing, that falls under that
Yeah.
purview. So,
Right.
so it's, it's just, it becomes complicated on how it applies to different people. But I think that we're on safe grounds
Yes.
here. Yes. Yeah. So is everyone comfortable with where we are? And we'll let our legal counsel go back and make the changes we've suggested today.
Yeah.
Okay. And then we will get back to this at our next meeting, and maybe even if we have time, start working on looking at the non-discrimination, anti-harassment policy next too. Then-
Yeah, so, the one question is whether to make the policies, these policies are for employees. So the question is, how do you want to say this policy also applies to you as officials and volunteers? Do you want a new policy? Do you want to just change the policy that exists to be more inclusive?
No, but I have no interest in changing workplace policies, HR policies, personally.
No.
Yeah, so I think we're better off not touching it, but it would mirror, or it should just say somewhere, you as a volunteer, in our volunteer policy, are obligated to comply with this policy.
Can we add that language to this policy that you're drafting now, the code of conduct for elected officials and city volunteers, under like non-discrimination, anti-harassment? As a volunteer, you are subject to the employment policy, the city's non-discrimination, anti-harassment employment policy. See it here, see the separate policy here. And we could do that throughout
Right.
where it's necessary.
Yeah. And you're right, there's no need to go beyond those.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, the policies, I think we all had a copy a few meetings ago, and they seem very reasonable. So it's not, shouldn't be a surprise to
Yeah,
anybody.
these.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. So, so if we can do that, I think that will handle it, and it'll be less complicated.
Yes.
If that works for everyone?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. I am going to stop sharing if I can. Oh, Wait, it put it down, but it didn't stop sharing it. I'm trying here.
Half sheet.
It's buffering.
I know, stop sharing. There, okay, all right. And we'll go back to our next item then on the agenda, since I want to get through this. I don't think that this is going to take
Public
very
Art
much time.
Review?
It's the Public Art Review Committee's ordinance draft changes. I sent this to the Public Art Review Committee, and they came back with some minor changes,
The yellow?
the yellow changes.
Yep.
Some of them are just typos that needed to be changed. But the major, well, they took out the such as a water or sewer plant comment here.
Because we're using that.
We are doing, yeah, we're doing a project right now that's affiliated with the sewer plant, so they didn't want to, because it's really not relevant anymore. When we changed the language a year and a half ago, that eliminated the need for that reference. The other thing that they did is they came back and gave us the language here under section, which is now 1706, expenditure of public art funds. I had a little paragraph that said, we need language here. They gave us an option on language. And what they're suggesting is that instead of saying up to 90% shall be attributed,
Right.
that we should go to 75% of the principal amount
Right.
is required for that space. I think there's a lot of concern about making sure that we have enough money for maintenance. And 90% might not necessarily provide us the long-term maintenance that they want. And they also want to make sure that that they're creating somewhat of a cushion in the public art trust, so that we do have some extra funds, so that if we have unanticipated maintenance somewhere, or we have a project that we have unexpected overage on installation, that there's a little cushion that can be used for that. So I think that that's what they're mindful of, keeping the intent that the money is all used on the project site, but that it's, that we're not being unreasonable with cost.
Yeah.
So, does that make sense to everyone? And
Yeah.
how does everyone feel about that new language?
Well, I mean, I've seen that new language because Owen was on that, and she showed that to me. So I think it's a good thing to put in there.
Okay.
Yeah, I tend to defer to their expertise. You know, several folks on that committee have been through decisions that we've made.
I'm in a similar position because fortunately, the chair of the committee wrote the original Present for Art ordinance. So she has a very long history
Oh, yeah.
with this.
Yeah.
And the secretary of the committee is in a similar position, having implemented the program the one other time that it was successfully implemented. So
Yeah, I think the percentage is valid. You know, I think that's the main thing that they're. And the way it used to be worded is that you had to use it. And it was unnecessary.
I think they're also trying to make this a little more flexible for the trustees of trust funds,
Yeah.
because they follow very strict guidelines, and they don't want to be in a position of the trustees say, well,
You got to pay them this.
yeah, what are you going to do with this, right? So it gives them that just little bit of flexibility.
I thought the idea of it going toward maintenance, is it specific toward that project, or does it go into a general maintenance fund for all public art?
Well, there is a requirement that a certain percentage goes for maintenance. You have to
10%.
set aside a certain percentage,
Yeah.
and it had always been 10% for every project, for that specific project.
Okay.
But I think the goal is some projects will require more maintenance than others.
Right.
So you need more than 10%. Others don't require quite as much maintenance. So you set aside the 10% and it just sits there and you can't expend it. So how do we make this a little bit more flexible? And we have projects in the past, before we had a percent for art program, that sometimes need maintenance,
Yeah.
that we don't have set aside funds for. It's kind of like if the whale sculpture
Right.
in Prescott Park needed maintenance. We don't have a separate fund set aside to provide that. So I think there's concern around that, making sure we do. Because we don't want to end up decommissioning anything because we don't have funds for maintenance.
Yeah, I mean, I love the fish in Bohenko Park, but I was thinking, oh, that's going to be maintenance.
Yeah.
Plexiglass.
Yeah, and I think that's the concern. We don't want to end up being in a position that
Yeah.
we have unanticipated maintenance, that we don't have enough money set aside. And that's why here you'll see under maintenance is the next section, is expenditure from the funds for the Public Art Trust, authorizing expenditure of funds for maintenance on existing art. So giving that authority to do that. Because it does set aside here the funds, this already sets aside the language that you can expend funds for maintenance, even though the funds weren't ever established there, but there's no way to establish funds, like if you didn't set aside the funds in the first place.
Right.
So, and then, Public Works going through and determining if there needs to be, and letting the city council tell the trustees to expend those funds. And that would come as a recommendation from the Public Art Review Committee. And so then you see here approximately 10% of the cost of the artwork,
Right.
instead of at least 10%. They want to say approximately because they do have some pieces that don't require.
Like indoor, yeah.
Yeah, like an indoor piece, for example, yes. A great example is the piece of the photograph we just accepted, from the city council accepted. It will be hung indoors. It will not need maintenance for 50 or more years, and even then, will it need maintenance? It might not,
And where is that being hung?
That's really the city manager's call. I've heard differing opinions, I think maybe at the end of the hallway here, but the city manager makes those determinations
Yeah.
inside the building. So we'll see, hopefully somewhere very visible. And so that's really the language that they came back with. Is everyone comfortable with these changes?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So then the last review, if everybody's comfortable with these changes, the last thing that I can do at this stage is ask, make sure the trustees or trust funds are comfortable with the language as is. But if that's the case, do we want to go ahead and move this forward to the council?
Yeah.
for final
Yeah,
changes?
I mean, I think
Let's get it done.
things are gonna stack up for the July meeting.
I think so too. And I don't think it'll be
August.
ready to go, I think it'll be
Yeah.
August, not
Yeah.
July.
Yeah, we got 2 meetings in August, so.
Yes, but if everyone's comfortable today, then we won't have to look at it again unless the trustees have a change.
Yeah.
And that gives us July, if the trustees have a change, but if not, then I'm happy moving it forward, if I could get a motion to do so.
So move.
Second?
Right?
I'm only seeing just a numbering issue here.
Yes, and we'll ask the legal department to
Okay.
make it fit our form.
All right.
with legal department editing to make sure it fits the form. So, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay. All right. So then we have completed that work. Hopefully I won't be back. I don't see anyone here for. We have one more item. I almost forgot. If you'll remember, the mayor asked that the governance committee consider a review and compaction of ordinances.
What does that mean?
the council meeting. Essentially, I think his goal is to eliminate unnecessary things that we have in the ordinance, or ordinance even that maybe is older that we're not following, just to streamline and make sure everything makes sense and is cohesive. I wanted to run this by everyone here to know that that's kind of the next task we've been asked to do. And that I'll have a conversation with the mayor around that, about exactly.
Yeah, that's
Where
pretty
he
wide
wants us
open.
to start.
That looks, it could look like a whole review of all the ordinances.
Could. I think you can tackle it in pieces, to be fair. We can finish the administrative ordinance, which, we've only done commissions, boards. We can finish administrative ordinance. We don't have to review parking and traffic safety because they do their own, We're not going to review the police the guidance around police and criminal conduct. I mean, but there are things like, then you have this whole set of ordinances around things like what's allowed for a circus in town, or door-to-door salesmen.
Yeah.
And I think that's the question, is like,
Yeah.
how much of this is still relevant? How much is necessary? And it can be a quick review to some degree. Some of it is we just keep it on the books because it is necessary. Some of it is, this isn't relevant to what we're doing today. Why is it still here? So I don't think it's that.
You're not going to
Extensive.
talk about the zoning ordinance, you're not going to,
Yeah. Yeah.
So you're pretty much staying within the admin.
Yeah, it's mostly just admin ordinance, I think, more than anything.
And there may be things in there that are inconsistent with other portions, say, of the zoning ordinance. So,
Right, and so that's a real question. If everyone's comfortable with that, I'll have a conversation with the mayor in our next meeting. We'll
It might,
start
yeah.
with that.
It might not be as daunting as we think,
Yeah.
No, I don't think it is. I mean,
as long as we're not doing zoning.
no, we're not going to touch the zoning. We have plenty of other committees that deal with that,
Yeah.
that we don't need to, thank goodness. So,
Okay.
so that's it. No public for public comment. I don't have any announcements, except our next meeting was initially scheduled, I believe, for just 2 weeks from today, July 8th, and then we have a second meeting of the 22nd for July. I don't know that we need to meet on both of those dates. We have plenty to do that we could, but
Right.
I wanted to check in with both of you and see what your thoughts are before I'll run this by the assistant mayor.
Yeah, there's a week I'm unavailable in July. I think
Okay.
it's 17 through 24. I'm just looking.
Okay. That might mean that we meet the 8th.
Yeah, I've been trying to keep that open, but that my daughter and grandkids are coming for 2 weeks, first week of July, first and second weeks of July.
Oh, goodness. Oh, no. Okay.
So, but no, I could sneak out for a governance committee meeting on the 8th.
Okay. Well, and there's also the option, it makes for a long day. Let's be really clear.
The
But
15th.
we could move it to a city council day.
No, I think the 8th is fine.
Yeah, because I'm away the next week.
Okay.
I may have to come back for the city council, but otherwise
You
I'm,
can be on Zoom. Boy, is that a pain in the neck to be at a city council meeting on Zoom.
yeah.
well, it's a pain in the neck for them to do
everybody.
Yeah, I
roll
know.
call votes for
Yeah.
everything, too.
And that's going to be a very packed agenda.
Yeah.
I'm only an hour and 15 minutes away.
So I'm removing governance from the 22nd.
Okay, so we will meet on the 8th, not the 22nd then. So I will make sure that I'll work with the legal department to get as much done in the next 2 weeks as possible. So,
There it is.
I'm not sure that this is the call I'm looking for.
is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Hello?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.